Hello and welcome. I want to open this new series with one of the most disarming stories Jesus ever told, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. It comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, and it reads as follows. He addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on all I own. But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed. O God, be merciful to me, a sinner, I tell you. The latter went home justified, not the former. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Luke chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. Two men went up to the temple to pray. Only one of them came down justified. And to the first audience who heard this story, it was the wrong one. To feel the force this parable carried for the people listening that day, we have to set aside the meanings that centuries have handed us and recover the words as they sounded then. When we hear the word Pharisee today, a single image rises almost automatically. The hypocrite, haughty, boastful, quick to judge. But that picture is a gift of hindsight. It is the verdict of 2,000 years, and the crowd around Jesus did not yet possess it. To them, the Pharisee was the most respected man in the community. He was the keeper of the law, set apart from ordinary life by his devotion. And that was no small thing. Tradition counts 613 commandments, the mitzvot, woven through the Old Testament, and the Pharisee bent his whole life to honoring them. He was no villain. He was the hero everyone hoped to resemble, and the tax collector. Today we sentimentalize him, the humble little man who quietly found favor with God. That too is hindsight. In his own day he was despised, and not unfairly. He worked for Rome, the occupying power, the boot on the neck of his own people. Worse, he was known to inflate the tax beyond what Rome demanded, and pocket the difference. He grew rich on the backs of his neighbors. He was not merely a sinner. He was a collaborator and a thief, ostracized from the temple, and on the rare occasion he dared to approach, he hovered at the very edge, exactly as the parable describes. Notice the choreography. The Pharisee took up his position. He claimed his place, near the front, where an honored man belonged. The tax collector stood off at a distance, ashamed to lift his face. One stood at the center, the other shrank to the margins. One was welcomed, the other was an outcast. Keep that picture before you, because everything that follows depends on it. Jesus tells us plainly whom this story is for. Those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. And so, in a few short sentences, he turns his listeners' world upside down. He takes the most admired man in the room and the most reviled, sets them side by side, lets each pray his prayer, and then lets God render a verdict no one expected. Consider the Pharisee first. He begins well enough. O God, I thank you. So far, so good. Thanksgiving is the right posture for prayer. But listen to where the prayer goes, because it curdles almost as soon as it begins. It turns sour because, although he names God, he is in fact speaking to himself and about himself. I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on all I own. 5 times in a single breath, the small word I rises from his lips, and not once does it leave room for anyone else, least of all for God. This is the tragedy of his prayer. It is a mirror, not a window. He came to the temple to look up, but like Narcissus, he was enamored by his own reflection. His words ascend a few inches and fall back into his own lap. He is full of himself, proud, accomplished, glorying in a righteousness he is certain he has earned, and he had earned a great deal. He went beyond what the law demanded. These are what the tradition calls works of supererogation. The law required a single fast a year. He fasted twice a week. The law asked tithes on certain goods. He tithed on everything he possessed. By every visible measure, the man was a spiritual master, and yet he fell short. Why? Here we touch the heart of the matter, and it connects this parable to the very first of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The man who boasts of his own righteousness is not poor in spirit. He is, by his own reckoning, rich in spirit. And a soul that believes itself already full has no room left to receive God's grace. Grace is a gift, and a gift can only be received with open and empty hands. The Pharisee came to the temple with his hands already full of fasting, full of tithing, full of comparison, and so there was nowhere for the gift to land. He lacked the one thing that opens the soul to God, humility, the honest knowledge that he stood every moment upon mercy he had not earned. Now turn from the Pharisee to the man at the back of the temple. He will not raise his eyes. He beats his breast, and he prays, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." 7 words, no defense, no inventory of good deeds, no glance across the floor to measure himself against the man at the front of the temple. He brings nothing but the truth and a plea, and the truth is that he is an unworthy sinner, and he knows it. That knowledge is his treasure. Who among us is without sin, asks St. John. And the one who claims to be, he says, is a liar. Sin is the common ground beneath every soul that has ever entered a temple or a church. The difference between the two men is not that one had sinned and the other had not. The difference is that one knew it and one did not. Oscar Wilde once observed that the only difference between saints and sinners is that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. There is real gospel in that line. The saint and the sinner are not two different species of person. They are the same soul caught at two different hours, and the door between those hours is always open. Think of St. Paul, who in his former life had been a Pharisee, zealous, learned, ferociously certain. He never hid the wreckage of his past. He named it, and named himself the least of the apostles, unworthy of the call. Paul is, in a sense, both men in this parable at once. The Pharisee he had been, and the broken-hearted penitent he became. His life is the proof that no one is permanently defined by his past or sealed inside his worst mistakes. The tax collector had a shameful history and confessed it, and for that he has become, across 20 centuries, a symbol of hope. Listen to the verdict of the Lord. I tell you that this man went home justified, not the other. This parable hands us a new pair of eyes for looking at worship itself. Both men were in the temple. Both went up to pray. Yet the Pharisee, standing front and center with a heart clouded by self-regard, was further from God than the trembling man at the door. Proximity to the altar is not proximity to God. So we are forced to ask, what is worship really? When we hear the word, we think of church, of services, hymns, set hours, prescribed postures. But worship is far larger than the time we spend in a pew. Worship is the shape of a life lived in keeping with the will of God. Everything we do, when it is done in the right spirit and in the right way, becomes an act of worship. There is an old story told about Dante, the poet of the Divine Comedy. During a church service, he fell so deeply into meditation that he forgot to kneel at the appointed moment. His critics, delighted to catch him, demanded that the bishop punish him for sacrilege. Dante answered them simply. If his accusers had kept their minds on God as he had kept his, they would never have noticed his posture at all. Dante got it right, and his accusers were Pharisees in miniature, counting the bending of a knee while missing the bending of the heart. True worship is not a performance stage to be seen, as Jesus warns again and again. True worship is a matter of the heart. St. Paul wrestled with this very question in the early church, when Gentile Christians, who took no part in the temple sacrifices, worried that their worship was somehow less. Paul reassured them, what matters is not the where or the details of the ritual, but the offering of the self. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, and that, he says, is your true and proper worship. Romans 12:1. Your bodies, he told them, is a temple of the Holy Spirit. So, just as you worship publicly in church, worship God with the whole of your week by the way you live, and above all, by the way you treat one another, at work and at home, in the classroom and on the playground, in the gym and around the table. That is the worship God receives with joy. Jesus brings the parable to its close with a sentence balanced like a scale.
Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted.
The man who lifts himself up will be brought low. The man who bows down will be raised up. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And then Jesus does something remarkable. He stops. He invites us to write the ending ourselves, not in words, but in the way we live. We complete this parable every time we choose the prayer of the tax collector over the posture of the Pharisee. Here then are a few ways we might write that ending well. First, reject the hypocrisy of the Pharisee. Every one of us carries a Pharisee within, forever eager to justify himself. You can hear him whenever we measure ourselves by judging and looking down on others. Do you take quiet pride in what you own? Do you criticize the people around you? Do you find it hard to accept those of another race or another faith? If you wish to grow great in the eyes of God, cast aside the hypocrisy of the Pharisee, accepting everyone as your brother and sister. There is an old in-house Catholic joke about 3 priests of different orders, each boasting of his own importance. The Jesuit said, "It is only fair to admit that we are the most important order in the Church, for we are the intellectuals, the thinkers, the ones who explain the faith to the world." The Dominican objected, "Not so fast. We are the order of preachers. We carry God's word to the people, and that makes us greater than you." And then the Franciscan spoke up. "Brothers," he said, "we cannot claim to be great thinkers or great preachers, but when it comes to humility, we are tops." It is a small joke, but it lays bare the whole comedy of human pride. Even our humility, left unwatched, finds a way to boast. And this parable runs flatly against the grain of our age, an age that has nearly enthroned self-importance and self-reliance as gods. That is precisely the spirit we must refuse, the spirit that prizes status and merit above a true relationship with the Lord. Second, beware the peril of fanaticism and the righteousness performed to be seen. The measure of righteousness before God is not the length of our fasting, but the depth of our love. Righteousness is bound up inseparably with compassion for the least among us. Recall how Jesus draws the picture in Matthew 25. "I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. And then, the line that turns the whole of religion on its hinge. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That is the worship that pleases God, not the righteousness that seeks approval, but love that bends down to the forgotten. Third, guard against the sin of spiritual pride. The Pharisee came before God, pleading his merits. His was a religion of works, and he was proud of them. He kept the rules, and the rules kept him. But rules make a sturdy fence and a cold home. For all his accomplishment, he lacked poverty of spirit. He suffered from spiritual pride. The tax collector pleaded no merits at all. He had none to plead, and precisely because he came empty-handed and aware of it, he went home full. Let me gather it all into a single thought. The heart of this parable is that God prizes genuine humility and a contrite heart far above outward performance. Self-righteousness builds a wall between the soul and God. Humility opens the door. The Pharisee went home with everything he came with, and nothing more. The tax collector went home with the one thing he prayed for. He was justified through the mercy of God. Two men went up to the temple to pray. May we go up as the second if we wish to come down justified. God bless you. Thank you for listening. And I am Hugh Duffy.